I'm Jared Ruckle, Product Marketing Manager for PCF at Pivotal.
And I'm Pieter Humphrey, Product Marketing at Pivotal, is focused on open source community.
Awesome. So you heard Ansi talk a little bit about PCF 2.3 on stage in the keynote. So the release is live and out there today, so you can download it, you can take a look at the docs, you can read the launch blog about it. Peter and I wanted to take you through some of our favorite features and highlights with everything. So we will ratchet up the excitement with a safe harbor statement. So most of what we'll be talking about today is already live and out there in the on the Pivotal network. You can download this stuff like I mentioned. Maybe your platform team is already running this through the CI/CD pipeline. But we may talk a little bit about some forward-looking stuff, so please take this, keep this in mind as we go through it here. Another thing to keep in mind, if you've talked to Pivotal, if you've heard the main stage earlier today, we're all about business outcomes and helping you achieve better business outcomes. And we like to talk about those business outcomes with the 5 S's, helping you go faster, helping you keep your applications online, meeting those SLAs, meeting those SLOs, helping you keep your applications online even as traffic ebbs and flows. Black Friday, new product launches, marketing campaigns, there are certain moments of truth where you need your systems to be online, and PCF can help you do that. Also security, how can you protect your secrets from getting out in the wild? How can you rapidly repair your systems? And then savings, how can you create differentiating software also, keeping your IT budget lean and mean. So that's what we talk about with business outcomes. And then of course there's a secret S on here, sustaining those over the long haul. So as we go through the features, we'll talk about the new capabilities under the backdrop of these 5 S's. And Peter will kick us off here talking about speed.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Yeah, so you heard Ansi talk about this a lot this morning, right? The rapid iterations between developers, operations, even the business. So big theme. Just curious, how many active PCF users do we have here in the audience? Fantastic. I would hope so, being the PCF session, but you never know. Anyone playing with PKS? Fantastic. All right, this is great. Excellent. All right, well, let's talk indeed about speed. One of the first things that we've introduced in PCF 2.3 is a feature which has been in beta for some time. This is called service instance sharing. The way it used to work was, if you notice the enclosing Cloud Foundry org there in the diagram, you might have multiple spaces within that org, right? Well, let's say you create a config server or a RabbitMQ instance or some other service instance perhaps. Before, you couldn't really share them across from one to the other. If the lady here on the left creating a Rabbit instance, or gentleman here on the right saying, hey, I'd like my app to receive messages from your queue. Well, there was kind of a hard line there, right? You couldn't really do that. And that was by design. It was for security, among other things. But we listened to our customers, and a lot of them said, hey, look, I might want to do scenarios like this, where I didn't see the need to use your queue in advance, right? We're iterating, we discovered the need to use it as we were developing. So could I borrow it, right? And if the answer is no, well, what's your alternative? Anyone want to guess? Or create another instance, right? You'd have to create another instance in that space. Okay, well, sure, you could do that, but that takes time. And it also takes resources. So ideally, what we want is a scenario where that looks a little bit more like this, where you can say, hey, I'm Jane over here on the left, but I'd like, the developer on the right is saying, hey, I'd like my app to receive messages from your queue. And now that is essentially possible. And you can use the standard CF command line. There's a special command to do the cross space binding. But now that that's accomplishable, and you don't necessarily have to resort to, okay, I'm going to create another instance, saving time and resources. So that's been in beta for some time, and is now generally available and ready for production usage. Also, any .NET developers in the room? Just curious? Okay, well, you're going to like the next couple slides for sure. Multi-Buildpacks. This is something that we've had on Linux for some time. And the idea is that you could daisy chain build pack runs, one after the other, and progressively modify the resulting container image that Cloud Foundry runs your app on. This was very helpful for a number of scenarios. We had customers that were doing Polyglot. Maybe they were doing a Node.js, React front end, with a Spring backend, and using multiple languages to accomplish a particular application. If you were doing that before, you were sort of stuck in forking the build pack and making it yourself, and doing DIY build packs, or doing some crazy Docker packaging. Now that you can, on the Linux side, that you've been able to daisy chain these build packs, it makes doing that a lot easier, and we're bringing that to .NET effectively. So for example, this command here showing that you can run using Windows 2016 and applying the hosted web core build pack, which helps support .NET. Also, if you're a partner or if you just have external libraries, you had to specify custom build packs before if you wanted to include an external dependency, like a library, let's say a new relic agent or something. And now, you would have had to embed that in your application. Now you can supply it in a build pack, which helps you, IT and you, have a central point of governance for how you are popping out containers, rather than handling as sort of one-off embedded in your application. So this provides some more flexibility and speed for people who are doing .NET applications effectively. Continuing on the .NET theme for just a moment, has anyone been working with Steeltoe? Just curious. I know there was just a couple .NET developers, so I'm not expecting a lot of hands. So this is bringing some of the microservices patterns from Spring Boot and Spring Cloud to .NET. So Steeltoe's been around for a little while. We had a 1.0, we had a 2.0, which is a pretty major release. And it turns out that 2.1 is actually a pretty hefty release. Despite the dot rev, it's larger than you might think. Now, if you're a .NET developer, this allows you to do some interesting things. There are application metrics that have been created for you based on OpenSensus, which is one of the other standards, along with Open Tracing and Zipkin, Sleuth, for doing distributed tracing and metrics. And now, those metrics are available for you automatically, and you can forward them to the Firehose, just like you can with Linux and Java applications, through the metrics forwarder, and then out to Logregator and other third-party things like Splunk or other log analysis tools. The metrics are also, of course, forwardable to our onboard solution, PCF Metrics 1.4, 1.5, and like I said, other third parties. Also, the OpenSensus seems to be very popular in the .NET community, so I guess that's kind of what they focused on first. And that is also compatible. We can export traces and spans and forward those over to Spring Cloud Sleuth and Zipkin, if that's the sort of, if you're in the Zipkin world. Also, we heard from a lot of our customers. We really focused with Steeltoe on .NET Core 2.0 and 2.1, and without the sort of classic ASP.NET 4.x, 4.5 stack that's been around in .NET for, the last decade or so. And so we've worked hard to make sure our customers are saying, hey, we're not just working on .NET Core. We have a lot of existing applications on ASP.NET 4x. Help us, what can we do? We'd like to introduce some of this microservice patterns onto those older applications and start to refactor and replatform them gradually. You may have heard some of these techniques like strangling monoliths or anti-corruption layers or things like that, where you're generally slowly porting over existing applications to make them more cloud native or 12-factor. So this helps in that regard, and we think that a lot of our customers who are using ASP.NET are going to be happy with this. But nonetheless, we're trying to retain compatibility. .NET Core 2.1 is a pretty big leap, but nonetheless, some of these features with Steeltoe are going to be available in both versions. One last thing which I think is really cool, Spring Boot users, real quick, show of hands. Okay, you probably know what the actuators are from Spring Boot, right? These are these built-in monitoring and management endpoints. Well, one of the coolest endpoints, it's my favorite on Spring Boot, is the /health. You can also create your own custom implementations, which is what we left the .NET developers to do in previous versions. We're shipping now out of the box with this release custom health checks for Redis, RabbitMQ, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server because, well, Microsoft, and even Postgres. So still, we're trying to make it easy for you to write your own, but we're also trying to ship a lot more out of the box for you. And then I mentioned really quickly, security, obviously always a big job for us at Pivotal. With Steeltoe 2.1, you can integrate with Cloud Foundry's a single sign-on and UAA, which stands for User Authentication and Authorization, if I recall correctly. Okay, very good. I'm not in trouble with Jared, that's awesome. Okay, and so you can basically secure your microservice endpoints using JWT tokens and OAuth 2 flows that are initiated and hosted by Cloud Foundry itself, and that security model. So a lot of more speed and productivity available to you if you are a .NET developer, and we'll talk a little bit more. William Martin, I think, is going to be talking about the Windows strategy, so that's something, if you are a .NET in this audience and you're curious about PCF, we'll talk about that in a minute. That's a session you should definitely go hit. Back in the Linux and Java world, if you're using Spring Cloud Services, which is the sort of onboard, built-in, push-button way of doing some of the server-side Netflix infrastructure for microservices like the configuration server, the dashboard for circuit breakers, and the service discovery. Those are kind of built right into Cloud Foundry. You push a button and you get a Linux container that runs Eureka for you. No effort required. So the open source that we work on Spring Cloud typically has a faster release cycle and a faster innovation cadence. And then Spring Cloud Services picks that up every once in a while. So the latest releases on that side, obviously, Spring Boot 2.0, huge release, next generation of Spring Boot for at least the coming year. So the Spring Cloud Services now supports applications that are written with Spring Boot 2 and with the brand new Spring Cloud Finchley, which has a number of very important things in it, including Gateway and a number of other new projects. There'll be a session on that as well. If you're a Dataflow user, Spring Cloud Dataflow, which is the short SCDF acronym there, now does some interesting things with scheduling. We find that a lot of our customers are still running large batch workloads. They're shuffling data around, they're moving megabytes, terabytes, gigabytes of databases and files around between machines. So who's still dealing with batch as a general concept in their organization?
It's okay, you can admit it.
You can, it's okay, this is a safe space, it's fine. So we're doing native integration now with Spring Cloud Dataflow, which is an orchestration layer. You might have heard Mark and some of the other keynote presenters this morning talk about that. Among other things, it does orchestration. And now you can basically, this is the equivalent of a cron job, except in a cloud-native, PCF-enabled way. So now you can basically work through Spring Cloud Dataflow and work directly, natively, using the CF Java client, which actually happens to be reactive, and call right into PCF to make sure that your jobs and your tasks, your short-lived run and execute and terminate type tasks are accomplished correctly. A lot of other updates in Spring Cloud Dataflow as well. It's picking up the latest version. Again, that open source tends to have a little bit faster of an innovation and release cadence. So once in a while, every quarter or so with these releases, we're generally trying to pick up that open source, certify on it, and say, hey, it's ready for you to run in production. So again, we're picking up that latest Spring Cloud Dataflow, and that introduces all kinds of new capabilities from Kubernetes security enhancements to upgrade to Angular 6 on the Dataflow user interface, and all kinds of things around database optimization with the schema to help it run faster. Even a domain-specific language for deployment, property, parsing refinements, a whole bunch of other things. New authentication security features. So if batch data integration, stream processing is something you're doing on PCF with Spring, this is something you may want to look at. Again, push button Spring Cloud Dataflow environment ready for you containerized with Spring Cloud Dataflow for PCF. Then the last thing for our operators, a lot of things for developer speed and productivity, but we're trying to listen to our customers and cater to our advanced users as often as we can. If you've used OpsMan before, if you're a Cloud Foundry operator, you know that when we introduced the selective deploy, there was a large gasp of relief, as if suddenly many PCF operators in the universe had rejoiced.
Screamed out in delight.
Screamed out in delight, yes. Alderaan was actually not destroyed. It was more that this feature was released, which allowed you to say, hey, I want to make one surgical change to my topology in my PCF deployment. Please don't redeploy the entire universe and take like an hour and a half or 2 hours. Thank you. Signed, the operators. So we're listening to that kind of feedback and running with it. There's another piece of how you kind of do deployments and do redeployments, things like tasks, errands, in this case, verification checks. These are to kind of stop the newbies and the new users from making silly mistakes, But for the advanced users, they can kind of get in your way. They can potentially even be a little bit annoying if you know what you're doing and you have a unique configuration. So effectively, you can turn these off, save a little bit more time, and just get to doing right what you know how to do. But there's still guardrails for less experienced operators. So with that, Jared, would you tell us a little bit about how we're working on stability in PCF 2.3?
Yeah, sure thing.
Thanks, man.
So that's 1S. So now we can talk about everybody's favorite topic in 2018, the operating system. Who's excited to manage operating systems these days? Yeah, nobody, because it's 2018. So a lot of you know that this is a big value that Pivotal provides, that we package up the operating system, embed it in a BOSH release, and we will often release patches. I think Ansi said every 6 days there's patches that we're responding to and issuing. And sometimes we do major upgrades to the operating system as well. So we've bumped the Linux version to Ubuntu 16.04. And then on the Windows side, we've bumped the Windows Server version as well, also as Ansi mentioned. And this is probably really interesting for the Windows sysadmins out there, because Microsoft is dramatically accelerating their support cycle for Windows. You're not having a version of Windows live for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years anymore. It's closer to 18 months. Wow. So you've got to find a way to rev that operating system lifecycle a lot faster. And if you're running .NET applications on PCF with paths for Windows, that job is already done and taken care of for you. So nice feature on the operating systems. Now we can not talk about operating systems the rest of the conference, I think.
Well, if we talk about that for one more second, I thought it was pretty interesting that not all Linux distributions are created equal, right? I mean, how does Ubuntu what's their secret sauce that allows us that fast patch management?
Yeah, I think Pivotal's a customer of Canonical's, and there's a nice partnership that we've forged with them. I think Spectre and Meltdown, there are a lot of sleepless nights that probably a lot of you had when that was happening earlier this year. It was a nice partnership to get the OS patched and get something out there in about a timely fashion under duress. Okay, so also in the vein of stability, PCF Healthwatch is also something that Ansi mentioned in the keynote. You need to monitor and manage your distributed systems in different ways, and Healthwatch is our out-of-the-box solution to help you be able to do that. We looked at what some folks were doing with PCF historically. There were some DIY tools that were a little kludgy and didn't quite match what the platform would do. It couldn't quite keep up with the metrics that were changing in the platform all the time. So customers said, Pivotal, please go and solve this for us. Give us an opinionated version of how to monitor the platform out of the box. We said, you got it. And Healthwatch is the answer to that. So in Healthwatch 1.4, we have a new extensible UX, green for good, red for bad, orange for maybe take a look. So we've extended that to give you a broader view of your platform across a number of different sources. So this is a really nice way to visualize what's happening in your platform at any given time. But of course, nobody wants to stare at a dashboard all the time. You have real work to try and do. So what we've done is we've added some alerts into PCF Healthwatch recently, and now there's an alert history screen. And this is really helpful. When something goes bump in the night, or there's an incident, or something that requires investigation, it's really an all-hands-on-deck type of effort. And so you want to have all your engineers with the same frame of reference for what might be happening in the system. And with the alerts history, you have a nice shared view, shared context of what's transpired. So you don't need to spend time talking to each other about filling each other in about what's happened. You've got all the context right here with this particular screen. So if you need to think about how you monitor your platform differently, you sure need to think about how you monitor your applications differently as well. And there's a handful of tools that can help you do that, and we have one that comes as part of PCF with PCF metrics. And 1.5 has kind of a nice feature. What we try and do is look at these moments of truth in the software development lifecycle. And one moment of truth is when you've got a new piece of code going into production, and hopefully you've got it tested and ready to go, but it's software, so things can be unpredictable. Some strange things can try and happen. And when you're at this moment of truth, you want to understand what's going on with your system in a really granular, real-time way. So in PCF metrics, you tick the play button in the upper right-hand corner of the module, and it's going to give you a real-time streaming view of what's happening with your system. So it's a really nice way. You don't have to hit refresh or wait for an alert. You can really zoom in at a microscope and see what's happening in real time, and hopefully get a closer look at what's happening right when it does happen, so you can jump in to make sure that you're achieving that stability that you want out of your applications. All right, scalability. Here's another one for all the operators in the house. So multiple data centers. As customers just start to use PCF, sometimes it starts in one foundation, but very quickly the conversation goes into how do I run this on more than one location? I want to do active-active, I want to do active-passive, I want to make this site cool, I want this to be warm, all those wonderful DR kinds of availability terms. There's also another architecture pattern that we've seen, and it's applicable for some scenarios, where you want to have a single BOSH director and a single PAS instance stretch across two physical locations. So it's a way of having a single foundation, a single BOSH director work in two physical sites. So we call this feature multiple data centers. We announced it for vSphere as part of PCF 2.2. So now if you're running VMware, you can run your paths in two different locations, have it look like a single foundation. Now OpenStack folks can do that same type of thing, and you can see where this is going in the future, that we may want to do this over time with public cloud providers as well. And speaking of public cloud providers, this is actually the technology that public cloud providers will use to make their availability zones work across different physical sites. One quick thing, latency can be a bit of an issue here. So if you've got locations and your data centers that are maybe hundreds of miles apart, you may want to look at that traditional active-passive type of configuration. So definitely talk to your platform architect and see if this type of approach makes sense for your deployment. All right, moving on to security. It's not really a security update in Cloud Foundry without talking about CredHub. CredHub is a really nifty way to manage the rotation of secrets inside of Cloud Foundry. If you've watched the release notes and if you've talked to folks at Pivotal, they've probably talked to you about CredHub and how it has this vision for getting credentials out of plain text and eventually encrypting them and then rotating them in a rapid fashion. So really kind of a neat way to think about solving that leaked credentials issue that crops up in all these terrible security breach stories we all read about in the news. So for this one, we'll talk about the CredHub Service Broker, which is an OS BAPI compatible service broker that helps you secure credentials for your off-platform services, a legacy database, or a parallel system, or something like that. Anything that's not PCF. And there's a new way that we can go back to the service instance sharing feature that Peter talked about earlier. So today, on the left-hand side, in the before world, you have this off-platform service called ProfitDB. Hopefully there's not a company named that'll get me in trouble trademark-wise. But if your application development team wanted access to that database, a platform owner had to parse out credentials to those application teams. You see that in the red boxes there. And so they'll dole out these credentials, and the application teams would then put those creds in the application code or a manifest or something like that. And that's something that is not a best practice, but maybe you can live with it for a couple different application teams. But as you start getting more and more teams that start banging on the system, it starts to get kind of uncomfortable. So with the service instance sharing feature, you can, the platform engineer, or the platform owner rather, on the right-hand side here, they can create an instance of the CredHub Service Broker service. They can have the credentials to ProfitDB stored there, and then they can share those out to those application teams as they need it. So the credentials are created as usual. The application teams can get access to that database and start to work with it and call it in their applications. The only difference is that the credentials live inside of CredHub. They don't go in the manifest. They don't go in the application code. So a nice way to really control and reduce the number of places that credentials appear in the platform, which is a really powerful security posture when you stop and think about it. Okay. One other thing here, Antti talked about mutual TLS here. TLS is very similar to CredHub in the sense that we've been adding TLS to more parts of the application. TLS is now responsible for more and more application flows inside of PCF. We're trying to get this encryption by default everywhere in the platform that we can encrypt your data in transit. And so what we did in PCF 2.1, we secured the traffic from the Go router all the way down to the application container level with TLS, and we use Envoy, some pretty slick tech to make that happen. And so what we do now in PCF 2.3 is really the reverse of this, where now the application container to the Go router is protected. So we call this mutual TLS app identity verification. So now you can make sure that only the Go router and application container can talk to each other. And if you think about what this means for TLS, it just means that both sides of that connection, both components, are who they say that they are, and they're authorized and able to talk to each other in a secure way. So for a lot of folks in financial services that have really strict regulations about how applications communicate, this TLS all the way throughout the platform is going to make the platform more suitable for some of those workloads where it was really a hard requirement. So really nice feature that really improves your security posture, because frankly this just helps you protect against people that are trying to spoof the headers from different layers of the application, and they're really locked out because of this TLS idea. Okay, and then finally for savings, Peter mentioned the idea of service discovery. If you're a Java Spring developer, you've got all kinds of great tools to help you with that with Spring Cloud Services. If you're on .NET, you've got Steeltoe now to help you with that. But if you're using a different language, you kind of have to bring your own service discovery. And now we're at the point where Cloud Foundry has matured to take on some of that service discovery burden for you as a developer. You don't necessarily need to change anything that you're doing today, but it is nice to have the platform bearing this responsibility and doing it for you. We announced this feature a couple releases ago, and there was a single domain name that it worked with, apps.internal. And so a few customers said, hey, I really like this Polyglot service discovery, but I already used that domain name in another scenario. Yeah. So now you can customize a domain name for use with this particular feature. So instead of apps.internal, you can use apps.custom or whatever it may be. And this is just a simple text field that you would fill in your configuration form when you're working to configure your PAS type of deployment. So with that, I'll leave it, turn it over to Peter again to go through some related sessions here since he put the agenda together.
Sure. Yeah, please feel free to comment as well. But there's a lot of related sessions about PCF, of course, but rather than throw the entire track up in front of you, just working off some of the themes you've heard here today in this talk. If you want to learn more about Spring Cloud Services, that talk on Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m., Cloud Native Java is going to be the place to be. If you want to learn a little bit more, we didn't really talk about one of the other big things in PCF 2.3, which is PKS 1.2. So if you'd like to learn more about that, we didn't want to sort of steal the show from that session. You can go to the Configuring Clusters talk. That's a little bit later today. And then another interesting thing, there are some real big changes coming up in the build pack methodology that we're using, not only with Pivotal Application Service, but with Pivotal Container Service as well, doing some interesting things with Heroku together in Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that and how that's evolving, I'd highly recommend the Cloud Foundry Build Packs talk. If you're into distributed tracing, the Radical Realizations talk is going to be a good one. If Jared's talk track about multiple foundations and availability zones and large Cloud Foundry installations tickled your fancy, I would go talk to Jim Basler at the Heavyweights, tipping the scales with very large foundations. He's been talking to a number of customers that have large Cloud Foundry installations and some of the unique problems that they tend to run into at that size. Again, for the .NET folk that raised their hand earlier, there's going to be some great stuff on .NET if you want to dive into Steeltoe on the developer side. But if you're also into using Windows, and like Jared said, if you're made nervous by the fact that you only have 18 months to manage a Windows fleet, that's a lot less time than before. PCF can really do some things for you that even Microsoft can't in terms of managing fleets of Windows servers. So please do check out William Martin's talk, New Capabilities and Strategy for .NET on PCF, because he's going to get into all the details there. And then finally, Jared, you want to take us home?
Yeah, just thanks for your time. As mentioned, all the stuff that we've talked about is GA. Download it from PivNet, check out the docs, check out the release blog post. You should be able to find all that stuff online fairly easily. And Peter and I are happy to take your questions in the hallway after this. Thank you so much for your time.
We'll be right outside. Thank you.